the Jubilee is coming. Oh, the Jubilee is coming. Keep on grokking in the free world. Grokking? Grok and roll? I want to be a grok star. If you don't know the word grok, G-R-O-K, look it up. It's a very valuable word, but I won't go into that here. However, I do want to talk about the free world because there's none left. There is no hope. All is lost. And the ancient empire of control and order has completely won. And we might as well just give up. Well, no, that's not true. There is actually a glimmer of a glint of a squint of hope. And it will continue to grow. And it will build. And before dawn, the darkness is strongest. And so I want to talk today about revolution because one cannot pursue a healthy, balanced psychology or psychological balance in a world of extreme imbalance. So there is, I think most people who have gone to therapy or studied self-help or philosophy know that the inner world can be modified, the thoughts can be changed, and one can change one's reactions to the world. And there's a powerful way of tolerating really difficult situations and making it through. However, there is a flip side to that coin where sometimes one needs to overthrow an order that is oppressive. If one is in prison and knows that they will die in prison, well, it's not too optimistic to say, well, I can just cope with it by repressing my feelings of anger and disgust at my captors, and yay, after I die, it'll be wonderful. That kind of philosophy is endemic in our culture, where it's just assumed that being a prisoner is the way of the world. And in some ways, life is kind of a prison. However, there is something that is freedom. And it might have its own restraints, but there is a new archetype emerging. And the United States has a very secret, esoteric, specific mission in its creation. What it was meant, and it's really beyond just, I know that the founding fathers were Freemasons and they were involved in secret societies, and they did really try to create a Masonic society with the adoption of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the Declaration of Independence. However, this is bigger than them. This is something that has been planned for a very long time, and that forces beyond the human level have, or like in the more ethereal level, in the God level, in the shamanic level, there has been history has been pushing towards really now to reach a point of creating a new archetype, a new expression of humanity. And what the United States represents is where all of the pieces get put together that were perfected in the old world. See, there were these sort of seed civilizations throughout the world. There was China, there was India, there was Africa, there was the Levant, the Middle East, there was Europe and South America, Central America, even North America. And I don't really care if this pisses people off, but the United States is where all of those pieces which were perfected apart so they could be fully developed, so the Eastern approach could be fully developed, so the Western approach could be fully developed in Europe, so the tribal shamanic could be fully developed in Africa, so that all of these parts in China, there is a specific Eastern approach that is different than the Indian approach. Many leaders of those ancient traditions came to the United States starting in the mid-19th century, and what they did is they germinated this new archetype that really tried to break out in the 1960s and even before so. In the 20th century, this new Aquarian archetype, this new whole human, was trying to be born. And then those old seed powers got jealous because it was so much more free, so much more whole, so much more self-reliant. And they freaked out and they said, oh no, we got to get in there and keep that from being born, because once that gets born, it's gonna like be the new PlayStation. Nobody wants the old one once the PlayStation 15 is out. And PlayStation 14 in the trash. The new Aquarian like paradigm, which jumped onto the scene with like jazz music. Think of a jazz musician, because that is a super progressive archetype. It knows how to be Eastern and Western at the same time. It knows how to fit into that jazz quartet. It knows how to lose itself in the group, but then it can also break out and do an independent solo within the context of that group. It's very androgynous in an elemental kind of energetic kind of way. So in the 20th century, especially in the African American community, it's just so underrated, like obscenely underrated. Like integration went the wrong way. Like black people should not have been integrated into white culture. White culture should have been integrated into black culture. I mean, it's so progressive. They learned how to survive in the world we're moving into when they lived in slavery and everybody was reduced to a number. There were no family bonds. Everything was ripped apart. You couldn't trust that somebody you were talking to wouldn't disappear the next day. They had to come up with a radical fucking solution to live in that Aquarian world. That was like the Aquarian horror. Chattel slavery was the Aquarian horror before we all get to live in it now. And I'm not saying I am a slave like that. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that horror, I mean, I've been enslaved in some really horrific ways in my life, but I don't care to compare myself. What I'm saying is that by those slave masters reducing those people to just merely a number, a faceless number, and really just oppressing them and turning them into just cogs in a machine, those people resisted, and they created a brand new culture for the world. And what came out of it was just like the savior of the world. And we've just flushed it down the toilet or turned it into generic bullshit music. We don't get that it's there so we can remember how to be free while wearing chains. That's what jazz was. That's what early rock and roll. That's what they lived in chains. And they said, fuck this. I'm not going to die without being at least free. I'm going to create so much energy that I will fly even with these chains. I will break my chains with the power of my expressive, masculine voice of jazz and rock and roll. And it's a super spiritual power. And like, it really sickens me what has happened to that voice. and how misunderstood. And I mean, it's on purpose. It's a revolutionary thing that certain individuals, certain people in power knew how dangerous it was. They saw that, like John Coltrane, Miles Davis, they saw how those people didn't give a fuck about what white people thought of them, and they were terrified of that. And so they got to work sending drugs into those communities, criminalizing marijuana to get all the black men into prison, and like attacking leftist groups because they saw the power in those groups. And those powerful voices of revolution, of freedom in the midst of chains, have been watered down, have been attacked with privilege, have been like thrown in prison and viciously attacked, and yet at the same time held up like, oh, we love these voices, while simultaneously imprisoned, attacked, ridiculed, and misunderstood. And I have been saved by that energy. My chains have been broken by that energy. And that is my God. And I call for a revolution. Living in chains, I could not unsee my chains, and I said, I will not die chained like this. And I don't care what people think. I don't care if they think I'm crazy. I will be free. I will revolt. And there was chaos in my life. And I found my freedom. They could burst in that door with their pathetic weapons and muzzle me, but now I am free. And I have flown, and I fly, and the revolution is coming. And I want to, one of my heroes is Malcolm X. And Malcolm X experienced chains on so many levels. He came into the world being attacked. His own father was attacked for being a voice of Black power and revolutionary sentiment. And his childhood house was burned down. And then later in his life, his house was burned down by those forces of order and control. But he chose to live in the freedom of fighting back. And he gave the metaphor of the house slave and the field slave, where in American slavery, where there were black slaves, African slaves, they often see that on the plantation model, the slave master would have, most of the slaves would be what are called field slaves, so they have to like live in these special houses and basically treated as the lesser than animals, essentially. And then certain people would be selected from those field slaves, and they would be put up to stay in the house, work as servants, or they might be given some more access to education, simplistic education. They didn't have to work as hard. They were pampered relatively to those field slaves. And Malcolm X said that if the master's house caught on fire, the field slaves would cheer, but the house slaves would freak out and try to put out the fire. Because they're so, confused. But they forget that they're slaves because they have a little privilege, basically. And they're willing to defend their oppressor because they have a little bit of relative privilege to those field slaves. And when Karl Marx popularized the notion of the bourgeoisie as a select part of society where the capital owners would give them special treatment so that they would support the capital's hegemony and power over society as a whole. The bourgeoisie or the upper to middle classes, they would work as like house slaves. And they're slaves, they're not free, but they're given food and shelter and special treatment so that they think they're not slaves. So when the capital owners are attacked, they rush to their defense. It's like a horrible Stockholm syndrome or like when a woman is defending her abuser because she can't imagine a life that's without the abuser. And this sickness is going away in the Aquarian age. It is already falling apart. Starting next year, there will be the first cannon fire of revolution. 2024, it will pick up speed. By 2025, it will be an overwhelming force for freedom. The rebellion will take hold. The Jedi will revenge their treatment. One of the original titles for Return of the Jedi was Revenge of the Jedi, and I actually prefer that. We can talk all about being peaceful and enlightened, but if you're in prison and there are people who are controlling your existence, yeah, it's important to find your zen and be able to not just let everybody who triggers you provoke you to attack. But we are reaching the end of the progression of control and order. And the planet Pluto, I'm going to talk about astrology a little bit because I just know this is going to happen. Planet Pluto is going to move into Aquarius next March 23rd, 2023. A lot of 23s, and the 23 is an important number. That will be, something's going to happen. And this old bullshit order that is being held together by duct tape and bubble gum is going to go, and like something is going to crash. And the way to freedom is not orderly. There's an order that is indecipherable to order. In the Bible, in the book of John, I love one of the Bible verses. This is like I'm going to sort of massacre it, but they're talking about the light and the dark, the two forces in the world. And they say that the darkness cannot grasp the light. Order and the feminine, irrespective of sex or body type or whatever, it has a lot of trouble understanding the free because it just thinks in terms of predictability and order. But trust that just saying, I will be free and I will follow my intuition and I will push and I will push and I will shake my chains and my cage and I will resist. And it's not going to make sense. That's what the song, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised, is about. Like, it will be chaotic. And that's the point. So, like, when people say, oh, revolution is so scary. Well, yeah, it should be, because this is worse than death, how we're living now. And if I have been lucky enough to see my chains exquisitely, and I see how everybody else is chained now, and the human spirit will not put up with it. So, I want to be free, and I will be fighting, and I don't care if it doesn't make sense, because I will not die enslaved. And I know that the tides and the forces of freedom are swelling and pushing against the gate. And starting next year, and starting fucking now, revolution is on the menu. And I know it's going to happen. Viva la revolution. And it might not be some communist thing. It might not be some socialist thing. Let's just talk about freedom. because it might be something similar to what the United States is doing. I don't want to put it into context of like communist models or socialist models or laissez-faire capitalist models. I don't think that those models are really applicable. What we need first is freedom, and then we'll figure it out. We don't have to go in with a model. It's the wrong attitude. We know when we're free, and we know we're not free. So don't worry so much about it fitting into like some sort of specific Marxist communist model or some specific Ayn Rand anarcho-capitalist model. Don't think about that. Think about your freedom. And you know it in here when you're free. You don't know it up here when you're free. This is not the free place. This is the free place. And yeah, light the fire of your heart and find your freedom. I know I will. Oh, somebody died today. All you ever had is in the middle of your soul. You never needed all the money to eradicate the whole. Oh, somebody died today. All you ever had is in the middle of your soul. You never needed all the money to eradicate the whole. All you ever had is in the middle of your soul. You never needed all the money to eradicate the whole.